This is another addition to the ongoing mini-series called localhost 1000, where I will document the progress of building and launching a web app, and also sharing the things I learned along the way. After a few years of working with cloud, dabbling both front-end and back-end, I thought it was time to try something new and something that would help me spin up web apps quicker and build full-stack applications. So I had seen the nifty things the combination of Node.js and MongoDB could do, and I decided it was time for me to take the plunge and build something with it. So these are 5 things I learned while teaching myself Node.js. Number 1, it's its own server. Because Node.js runs on JavaScript, it needs its own runtime environment similar to that of C# and .NET or Python and Django. What this means is Node.js runs like a local server, and once you install it and write a basic server script, in this case app.js, you can start your own server each time you want to develop or add a package. You can fire up a Node.js application super easily by using the command npm start in terminal. Later on in the video, I will discuss what are packages or modules while working with Node.js. And if you have something like Nodeman as a package installed in your application, you don't have to restart your server each time you make a change. I will talk about that in a minute. The URL localhost 1000 then becomes available, and it's where you can work on the application locally. You can choose whatever port you want to run your application on as long as it's available. This makes it easy for you to run multiple applications. Maybe you can have an application on localhost 1000 and you have another one on 1001. Number 2, asynchronous JavaScript. This is something that's hard to get your head around initially when you learn JavaScript. I was already used to this from my work and past experience, but I saw online a lot of people are confused by how asynchronous JavaScript works, and I can totally understand why. So in this example where I'm getting a user detail from my database service, when I execute the code right after it, most often than not, it will be undefined. This happens because you're trying to execute your code on a synchronous manner, meaning before your database service returns the value to your user details variable, you're trying to access it. So in JavaScript, you can do something where you actually wait for the function to resolve itself before executing the next line of code. In simple explanation, that's what an asynchronous JavaScript method does. There are a couple of solutions of how you can do this. Number 1 is promises await async. So using async await syntax, you can rewrite the previous example, like having a function which is asynchronous to get your user details, and when you're calling the method, you have to await for it to resolve itself or the method to return its value before you execute the next line of code. So if you're starting a Node.js journey, I would recommend to do some basic promises to get a good grasp of the concept behind this, because writing async await is a more of an ES6 syntax, so it's better to work with callbacks to understand what's the underlying principle. So that brings us to the point of callbacks. So the way how you write callbacks is, if you were to rewrite the previous example in the most basic way, it would look something like users.find1. You pass in the parameter of the username, and the second parameter of your function or your promise would take a function which either resolves or returns an error message. This is not the best way of doing this, because when you write more complex applications, you might get into something called callback hell, where you have a function making a callback and you have another function inside that callback making another callback. This will help you to understand the basic concept of what's happening underneath the asynchronous JavaScript. Number 3, npm livesaver. It's only when you start to Google for solutions for the problems you have, you start to understand there is something called npm or package manager, which shows the amazing work some other developers has done to solve your problem. So if you go to npmjs.com, npm is a default package manager for the JavaScript programming language and is included as a recommended feature in the Node.js, and you will realize just how vast it is. You can think of package or a module more of like a utility class which has a bunch of methods that can help you write your application. One thing to note here is try not to use way too many packages or dependencies to your project, because at the end of the day, these modules or packages are managed by a bunch of developers, meaning these are code written and maintained by other people. So the more dependency you have on your application, there's a high chance that one of these unmaintained package or module will break your application. One tip here is if you go to the npm website and go into a specific package, you could actually see how many downloads it has. Based on that, you can get an idea of how well the package is maintained or how popular it is in the community. Now I want to talk about few packages that has helped me on my application, which are just lifesaver. Number one is debug. You can run the command npm install debug in your terminal to install debug in your application. Debug exposes a function. Simply pass this function the name of your module and it will turn a decorated version of console.error for you to pass debug statements to. This will allow you to toggle the debug output for different parts of your module in your application as well as the module as a whole. Second one is nodemon. You can run the command npm install nodemon. Nodemon is a tool that helps you develop Node.js based applications by automatically restarting the Node application when file changes are detected in your app. So if you don't have a package like nodemon installed, each time you make a change in your application, you have to kill the server and restart your server. So having something like nodemon will help you not do that. It would automatically restart your server. In your package.json of your Node.js application, you can specify the script what you want to run. So in this example, I have given start to nodemon app.js. So the next time I run npm start, my application will already run using nodemon. So I don't have to kill the server and restart each time. The next one is .env. To get .env in your project, you can run npm install .env. .env is a zero dependency module that loads environment variables from a file .env file into process.env. So more often than not in your application, you might have some secrets like API keys, client ID, client secret. So instead of hard coding these things in your application, you can have a .env file, and having this package .env would help you to store them into a process.environment variable, and then you could just refer to that in your application rather than hard coding it. You can at least talk about a dozen more packages that you could use, but like I said in the beginning, you have to be really purposeful about what kind of dependency you're creating in your application. Moving on, number 4 I learned while learning Node.js is that plenty of frameworks and templating engines. Another beautiful thing about learning Node.js is there are plenty of frameworks. I'm talking front-end framework, templating engines, and hosting framework. And you can build your application in whatever technology you're most comfortable with. Talking about hosting frameworks like Fastify, Express, Nest.js, you can use any of this to spin up your local server and start your Node.js app. So I obviously went with the Express option here because Express is the most popular and the most maintained one. But there are also other key players in the community now. Fastify is one of the popular one recently. So it all depends on what kind of application you want to build. If you're going for a MERN stack, of course, you're going to use Express as your hosting framework, but you could choose whatever you're comfortable with. In order to install Express in your application, you have to run the command npm install express. If you want to look into other hosting frameworks, you could go ahead, but I was more comfortable using Express, and since that's the most popular choice. Talking about templating engine, there are quite a few templating engines you can pick from, like EJS, Mustache, Pug. All of them has their own benefits. At the end of the day, you're just writing normal HTML, and the only thing that changes is the syntax of how you bind your data. So I started with EJS. The syntax is pretty simple for EJX. I've worked with other templating engines before. EJS will be quite familiar. You write normal HTML and embed JavaScript into it. So in order to pass data, you have a specific syntax where you open a less than sign, percentage equal to, and then you pass in the data. And from your Node.js application, you can just pass in the data to the specific HTML file you're rendering. It works well with Express. It's super fast. It was clean for me to spin up a simple UI for me to test out my application, because my thought process was, at the end of the day, I'm not gonna deploy this templating engine to production, because by the time I have a full-fledged application, I'm planning to have a proper front-end framework, something like React or Angular, to have a mean or MERN stack application, not just a templating engine, because you don't have much freedom there. But for you to spin up apps quicker when you're trying to learn Node.js or trying to build an app real quick, templating engines are really helpful. Number 5, SQL or NoSQL. So I've been working with Oracle database for the past few years. So I'm pretty comfortable writing SQL queries to get data out of your database. And I'm also comfortable with the concept of tables, records, fields, and so on. So when I started using a NoSQL database like MongoDB, I had to rearrange my concept a bit or throw some of the concept I had in my mind outside the window. The first non-relational database that I'm working with is MongoDB. To get MongoDB installed in your Node.js app, you have to run the command npm install MongoDB. So the cool thing about MongoDB is that you don't need to define the schema and columns of your tables. MongoDB doesn't really care as long as it has an ID, and then you can have different objects within one collection. So I quickly realized what MongoDB refers to as collection is a table, and you could run commands like database.collection and refer to the table's name and use functions like insert one, find many, and so on. And unlike SQL databases, you can give in any field data type and the table would just accept it. Of course, you have to structure your data in whatever way you want, but it doesn't really care what kind of data type you're inserting. Picking up Node.js, Express, and MongoDB was quite straightforward, as I had worked with templating engines and JavaScript before, and I was also used to the concept of asynchronous JavaScript. But understanding how Node.js typically runs on a server and how routing takes place, all of these concepts took a bit for me to grasp, but I find it quite enjoyable. The speed and the endless useful packages that you have on npm makes things a bit more easier if you want to spin up full stack web apps quicker. So I would recommend anyone to learn Node.js if you're looking into learning a stack that would help you build full stack applications quicker.